You know, originally I was going to start this review by holding my new Legend of Zelda mug because I like nice things and I thought it looked nice and flashy, but then I thought people are going to start comparing me to Some Call Me Johnny and thinking I'm ripping him off, so I definitely can't have that, so I guess we're just going to do this review with traditionally nothing. Okay, so let me take you back a little bit, give you a little bit of history lesson about my upbringings. You see, back when the PlayStation 2, Xbox, and GameCube were brand new, the talk of the town was what the next best console was to get and which one should you get. And being a kid and impressionable, I thought the Nintendo GameCube was definitely the wise choice at the time. And to be fair, it's not a wrong choice. I mean, you had a lot of great games that were coming out for it, from Super Mario Sunshine, The Legend of Zelda, which at the time we had no idea what to expect, and things like that. But then over time, it quickly dawned on me that maybe I jumped the gun a little bit and made the wrong move, because there were games that were being released on the PlayStation 2, which were pretty exclusive to the system, and I I really made a mistake. So yeah, if you've seen that, clearly when Kingdom Hearts was first announced, I was all for it and thought it was the absolute amazing thing, and I was right. I fell in love with it. So trying to convince my parents at the time to sell off a Nintendo GameCube in order to get a PlayStation 2, which was not an easy pitch, let me tell you. I was not a rich kid, so we did end up getting the PlayStation 2, but I had no games for it. But that was until my late cousin, who knew I had the system coming, decided to give me a couple of gifts to go with the system as I got it. And those two games were Devil May Cry and Onimusha Warlords. Two phenomenally fantastic games created by Capcom, and both having a very similar history, if you know what I'm getting into. So obviously, if you've seen the title of this video, you clearly know that Onimusha Warlords is going to be the main subject of it. But however, Devil May Cry and Onimusha do have a similar history, so I'm going to talk a little bit about that. You see, back in Capcom's younger days, they were hella getting into their survival horror goth years. I mean, as we all were. It was the early 2000s, and trust me, Hot Topic, Evanescence, Linkin Park, and everything goth were very fashionable trends. So Capcom really wanted to continue banking on the success of their Resident Evil franchise. And while that in of itself proved complicated when it came to direction and how the series should advance moving forward, developers within wanted to work on spin-off titles that were either directly related to Resident Evil, or at least inspired by it. Devil May Cry 1 and Onimusha 1 are, in the end, byproducts of those ideas. Games that were very likely originally planned and created conceptually to be continuations of the series by introducing new characters and lore. However, over time, because of internal politics, reasoning that the games they were creating were starting to drift way too far away from what made Resident Evil what it was, the games may have been potentially put up on the chopping block. However, instead of doing just that, Capcom creators opted to do the more creative thing, and instead of scrapping everything that they had worked hard on, they would instead reutilize all of the assets and create something unique and original, and see if it would stick. Okay, now I have no doubt that that was nothing but a gross oversimplification of these games' true beginnings. After all, Onimusha really can be dated as far back as the late 90s with the creator Yoshiki Okamoto. Alright guys, so before we get started on this review, I should let you know Onimusha Warlords has had quite a few renditions over the years, and I have quite a few of them here. I mean, we have the original Onimusha Warlords for the PS2, the Japanese version, the later released Genma Onimusha Warlords for the original Xbox that has some extra bonus content, and the most current version, the PlayStation 4 remaster of Onimusha Warlords. Now, I'm going to primarily be focusing on the PS4 version, as this is pretty much the one everybody can get their hands on with ease, as it's also available on the Nintendo Switch. And pretty much it's the exact same game as the original PS2 version, and the Japanese version kind of comes packaged with all of them just by changing the language in the subtitles area. But that doesn't mean we won't be taking a look at the Xbox version too at some point in this review, because it too has some unique content that cannot be found anywhere else, and I do think it's worth a look. With that being said, guys, you're watching The Brotherhood of Gaming. Let's get started. Anyway, because of Onimusha's potential upbringing and relation to the Resident Evil franchise, it's definitely noticeable the moment you start playing that you can see all of the similarities between them. Onimusha plays with traditional tank controls and fixed camera angles with highly detailed pre-rendered backgrounds. However, instead of firearms with limited ammunition, the game focuses more on hack-and-slash combat with traditional swords as well as magic-based weaponry. Hey, this may be feudal Japan, but it's still very much a fantasy. That is, well, very, very loosely inspired by real events. Most of the characters in the game are based on real people through Japan's rich history. And depending on which side of history you were on, people like Nobunaga Oda may have been considered a hero or a villain. Now, to be quite honest, I don't really care about the historical accuracy or lack thereof when it comes to fantasy adventures like these. It's all played out just for fun and for the sake of having a good story to tell in a video game. Besides, call me crazy, but I don't think real-life demons and monsters were around in feudal Japan taking sides in wars to determine who the next ruler of the land would be. So, all in all, the story is not meant to be taken seriously, and honestly, if you can get past that, you should be just fine. So, that being said, let's get into it. I'm William Morris, and we're going to talk about Onimusha Warlords. During one of the wars in Okihazama, Lord Nobunaga is doing battle with another faction. It's unclear if Nobunaga is the enemy or a friend here, but either way it doesn't matter as... 'Tis but a scratch. Well, that ended that. Meanwhile, in the nearby mountains, we're introduced to our lead protagonist, watching from afar, Hidemitsu Samanosuke Akechi. This opening cinematic where we got to watch all of these introductions take place is still, to me, very enjoyable, as well as theatrical. It's very much like an opening to a movie, and I'm sure that was the intent. Not to mention the beautiful orchestra score which accompanies it. Yeah, well, speaking of the music, we'll get into that later, trust me. By the by, the intro brilliantly introduces us to a badass main character who shows that he's very skilled in the art of kicking ass. It shows us the conflict or state of the times we're in, and the death of a feudal lord, but it also introduces us to our female of interest named Princess Yuki, who's greatly concerned about the times and writing an open letter to Samanosuke for help as she can sense the immediate danger lurking all around her these days, which only gets worse with her getting suddenly kidnapped, Samanosuke arriving sheer moments too late to stop it.
Samanosuke.
I will save Princess Yuki.
Hell yeah. This, my friends, is how you start a game. Samanosuke reads the letter he got from Princess Yuki, and it details that she's began to see some very strange and terrifying works going around the Inubiyama castle. People have started disappearing, and the talk of the town is that monsters and or demons have been appearing, and they are the ones mercilessly eating and killing humans indiscriminately. Kaede, a female ninja who travels alongside Samanosuke as his partner on his many adventures, is also here to help aid him in any way she can. But for the sake of gameplay, this more often than not involves the duo splitting up in order to cover more ground.
Kaede, I'll go north. You follow them through the other way.
Understand.
The kidnappers, surprisingly, didn't get too far, as they, along with Princess Yuki, are close by. Samanosuke manages to fight them off, but something seems amiss as they aren't exactly, well, dying. After a brief respite with Princess Yuki, an even bigger threat shows up. Surprise, it's a demon!
Flee while you can, you worthless bug!
Unfortunately, regardless of Samanosuke's skills, he's quickly brushed aside while Yuki is captured once more. Fortune, however, smiles down upon Samanosuke, and while unconscious, the creatures called the Oni, or Clan of Ogres, inform him that without their help, he will not be able to defeat the demons permanently, if at all. But they will supply Samanosuke with their powers, giving him the ability to defeat and seal the demons' souls to his right hand.
The power of this gauntlet. I will destroy all of those monsters and save the princess!
Samanosuke surprisingly takes all of this pretty well and accepts this new power gauntlet given to him with vigor. From this moment onward, Samanosuke slowly but surely becomes a threatening force to be reckoned with, as he nearly effortlessly handles handfuls of demons at once, where other forces tend to get overwhelmed pretty easily. Advancing towards the castle keep, Samanosuke eventually catches up with the monster that took Princess Yuki. The towering demon does indeed put up a bit more of a fight than the average monster, but with some careful maneuvers, avoiding the beast's heavy strikes, as well as delivering some of our own, the giant does eventually die. Heading further inward, Samanosuke discovers a room with a new creature that appears to take great pleasure in dissecting human remains.
Who's there? A human? How disappointing.
While his name is pretty much a mystery in this game, we discover eventually that this monster's name is Guildenstern, a well-spoken demon heavily advanced into the dark arts of science. He's not too happy to see that Samanosuke, a mere human in his eyes, has managed to make it this far. However, this doesn't stop Guildenstern from giving Samanosuke some heads up as to what the demon's agenda is, as he feels there's no way Samanosuke will live long enough to see it come to fruition. The demons, for reasons unknown, have used their powers to resurrect Lord Nobunaga Oda from death after he was killed in Okihazuma. Nobunaga apparently from then on made a pact with the demons, effectively becoming their slave. However, the demons desire Nobunaga to have more power, so in order to do this, they have kidnapped the princess and plan to sacrifice her whilst having the newly resurrected Nobunaga drink her blood from her own severed skull. Yeah. As you can imagine, Samanosuke has a problem with this, but Guildenstern escapes the room seeking one of his creations, Ronaldo, to kill us. After retracing his steps, Samanosuke storms the castle keep and finds a man attempting to capture a child. The boy escapes as Samanosuke gets involved, but the very creepy man who introduces himself as Tokichiro Kinoshita, who, while clearly a human, is very much on the side of the demons. More than happy and eager to aid them in Nobunaga's goal in triggering the Dark Ceremony. In a unique surprise, the narrator of this game we didn't even know we had actually breaks the fourth wall here to tell us that this man, Tokichiro, is in fact another historical figure named Hideyoshi Toyotomi, and that someday he will conquer the world. In my opinion, while in the end it's harmless, I didn't really care for that interrupting tidbit of information from the narrator, and frankly, I don't think that this narrative disturbance was even needed, and that's ultimately because it doesn't really hold any relevance here. Well, not in this game anyway. So Tokichiro, or Hideyoshi, whatever you want to call him, invites Samanosuke to join the winning side with the demons. But our creepy friend clearly put all of 0 points in his charisma stat, cause Samanosuke quickly shoots that offer down with a resounding no! Why Samanosuke doesn't just kill the guy here and now, we'll never know, but luckily both Kaede and Samanosuke managed to find the kid and discover his name is Yumemaru, and he was the adopted little brother of Princess Yuki taken in when his parents were tragically killed. Before the duo have much time to even discuss the strange events, Yumemaru is snatched by Tokichiro and his group of demons. They offer Samanosuke one more chance to join their side, but again, that charisma check is at an all-time low, and Samanosuke makes it pretty clear. Move! After making it to the roof, we have a showdown with one of the stronger demons. Marcellus proves to be one of the tougher demon warriors to fight Samanosuke, harnessing wind powers. But thankfully, at this point, Samanosuke has harnessed some power orbs of his own, containing elemental magic and weapons to go with them, the Ryzen lightning sword and the heavy Enryu flame sword. Utilizing both, Samanosuke defeats the demon and collects the wind orb it was using, granting our hero all 3 elemental weapons, the 2 I mentioned earlier, and now the Shippu Wind double-bladed bow staff. All of these together, along with the elemental magic attacks, make Samanosuke an absolute monster of a demon slayer. Now that Yumimoto has been rescued, the boy finally opens up to Samanosuke and Kaede, fully believing that they are the good guys in all of this, and thus begs for their help to save Princess Yuki. The 3 of them have a brief moment of rest, and our hero takes this moment to drop words of wisdom upon the child that instead of growing up and wasting time getting involved in petty wars for small portions of land, he owes it to himself to travel and see the world and learn from different cultures just as Samanosuke did, discovering and learning things he thought he'd never see. The lesson is cut short, however, when a woman suddenly appears, informing the group that Princess Yuki was spotted being taken underground. Samanosuke travels down alone, but surprise surprise, it was a trap set up by Tokichiro. If the situation wasn't bad enough, an even bigger surprise catches Kaede off guard when a doppelganger demon of Samanosuke knocks her unconscious, and the woman from earlier being in on the scheme. Yumimoto has been taken once again. Kaede recovers, and for the time being, the player assumes control of our female ninja and gives chase. In a twist, Kaede instead finds Princess Yuki and attempts to rescue her. Guildenstern ain't about to let that happen though, and Kaede finds herself under attack by one of the crazy scientist's new experiments. Kaede does defeat it and decides to instead find the real Samanosuke. Speaking of which, our hero wakes up just below the castle keep where he is found by the doppelganger. And while the clone may have Samanosuke's look down, this definitely ain't no Shadow Link moment from Zelda 2.
I'm about to whip somebody's ass. Oh.
Anyway, Samanosuke manages to find Yumimoto and the woman who led them astray, and oh boy.
Oh, not the beast! Not the beast! Ah!
The door to the demon world has appeared before our heroes, but without a way to get past the barrier, they are forced to split up again and find a weapon strong enough to pierce through. Their only remaining path leads both Samanosuke and Kaede to a nearby shrine floating upon the lake, where the duo individually find both a great bow and arrow. The pair get ambushed right after, though, by the wasp demon from before, proclaiming that no matter what happens now, the dark ceremony won't be stopped, and Yumimoto's capture was just so that he could be sacrificed in front of Princess Yuki, which would have her sorrow peak, making her blood more potent or something when Nobunaga drinks it. I don't know, demons are weird. Samanosuke engages the wasp demon and her minions in a more ranged fight than we're used to, but with perseverance, the demons here are defeated. Kaede set up some gunpowder nearby, allowing all of them to be dealt with in one fell swoop, and then the pair make a quick escape. But at this point, Kaede has become too exhausted to carry on. Samanosuke claims that it's time to put an end to all of this, and he guns it straight to the demon world and breaks his way in. Guildenstern, of course, waits for us on the other side, definitely impressed that Samanosuke has managed to do the impossible and make it this far, but confident to a fault, believes he's finally got our hero's number, and sicks his final creation on us. This new and improved version of Marcellus proves to be one of the toughest fights, if not the toughest fight in the game, and this is due to his multiple phases. He changes from his defensive form to his powerful speed form, which can definitely catch Samanosuke off guard. Still, by now, with all of the upgrades and equipment our hero has in his inventory, even this final creation is no match. However, Guildenstern is gone, and lives to fight another day. Samanosuke charges through the demon realm, making it to the ceremony room where Princess Yuki and Yumimoto are held captive. Nevertheless, there is still one more challenge awaiting us. Oh yeah, here he is, the mighty king of demons, Fortinbras. This summon skull-looking behemoth towers over our hero and is not a fight to take lightly. He hits hard and has some powerful area of attack powers that dodging should be a priority. Even with all of Samanosuke's combined power and equipment, Fortinbras is a somewhat long-winded fight, as this Demon King is very durable. His attack patterns may be somewhat predictable and not terribly hard to block or avoid, but he makes up for it by hitting that much harder, and just taking a long time to put down. But with the player's patience and Samanosuke's courage, even the Demon King falls to our hero. With the final obstacle put down, Samanosuke and Kaede manage to rescue Princess Yuki and Yumimaru as the Demon Realm Chamber begins to collapse all around them. But the Demon King gets a second wind and grabs Samanosuke. The hero shouts at everyone to leave him behind and save their own lives, which they reluctantly do, and sadly, this looks like it could be the end of our warrior. Oh, hell yeah! Okay, so from what I've come to understand, now that Samanosuke has mastered his magic powers, the Oni within him is now a special form that Samanosuke can use. And if there was any doubt that Samanosuke was the one to be feared by the demons, this virtually unstoppable force in mere seconds cuts through the Demon King Fortinbras like a smoldering hot knife through a stick of butter, all without even moving. And just to top it off, the Oni stabs the monster right through its skull, killing it once and for all. Samanosuke is able to recover alive and well, but there is no time for celebration. The newly resurrected Nobunaga has arrived, just in time to see his ambitions thwarted. With the realm continuing to break down, the narrator chimes in during the game's conclusion to inform us about the aftermath, and the characters we grew to know, and what happened to them long after the events of the game. Yuki and Yumimaru did manage to escape and travel to see the world together as per Samanosuke's wishes. However, Kaede went on to search for the missing Samanosuke, but according to the narrator was unsuccessful, and then later in life was tragically killed in a war. But as for Samanosuke, well, as the narrator puts it,
no one knows what happened to him.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure for the right price, Capcom would be more than happy to tell us what happened to him. Poetic, but for the sake of ending things on a possible lighter note, the post-game does show a short clip of Samanosuke still wearing the gauntlet, walking away during the dawn of a new day, which easily suggests that he's still alive and out there somewhere. But for all we know at the time, this was the tale of Onimusha Warlords. And so now I gotta ask myself, as you probably are, what did I think of the story? It was very fundamental. I think that's the best word to use here. Honestly, I feel this is how a lot of new franchises were at the time during the PlayStation 2 era. Newly inspired games were coming out all over the place, and most of their stories, like Onimusha Warlords here, started out with very grounded and basic plots that don't go beyond anything that we may not have already seen before, but it brings its own original spin on things, and plants the seeds for what could potentially be the start of a new series should the game in question be lucky enough to pick up steam. Onimusha's story, when you get down to it, is a tale as old as time. A daunting hero on a quest to save a princess from the evil clutches of whatever threat befalls them. With some added flavor of being loosely, albeit very loosely, based on real events. With some added spices of supernatural magic and demonology taking place in the feudal era of Japan. Taking all of those aspects and combining them with care, despite being simple, Onimusha's narrative was an intriguing ride that I thoroughly enjoyed when I first played it all those years ago. And it's still fun to revisit every now and then. There's nothing upon revisiting the story 20 years later that I can say has aged poorly, nor is there really anything that I can say has gotten better with time either. Well, except for this part.
You...
The characters are very likable. Samanosuke is naturally your Dudley Do-Right kind of hero. You know, the kind that would have no problem being your best friend and always striving to do the right thing. And hey, those are the kinds of heroes that I personally like. He doesn't really have any personality flaws, and that's not really a bad thing here. The story is on the shorter side as a whole, so if I'm being real, it's because of that we're only given so much time to really get to know these people, as there really is no time for anyone to just sit still. The story is always on the go. Samanosuke still does come off as the occasional quiet and pretty serious type. Kind, yes, but definitely a man on a mission. But he's also not what I'd call a Gary Stu either. He's by no means invincible, and he's gotten brushed aside and can occasionally be tricked, so there are times where he can clearly struggle. But in spite of this, he is ready to bounce back and carry on. All in all, Samanosuke, in my opinion, has become a classic video game hero, and one that made enough of an impact on me that should the series have moved forward, he was the one that I was hoping to see again. Kaede as his partner or sidekick was also a fun character I grew to like as much as Samanosuke himself. We don't really learn anything about her except that she is just a female ninja that, for reasons, tagged along with our hero quite some time before the game began. But none of that is really important, and frankly I think it's better left as a mystery. She's very much capable in her own right, but even she can be surprised by unforeseen occurrences, but ultimately she is still a good person and very loyal to Samanosuke, wasting no time to come to his aid or help him in any way she can. All of the supporting cast are played out pretty well too. Some villains come and go pretty quickly, but they aren't really meant to be anything more than that. Guildenstern being the one exception with his very quirky and eerie hobby, made him a character you know would be reoccurring in some way, and I think the game is all the better for it. And because, comparatively, the Demon King Fortinbras really is just a final boss that is killed off as quickly as he's introduced. And Nobunaga, despite being built up as a supposed threat for the future, plays almost absolutely no role in this game at all, short of being a plot device. It is unfortunate, but considering what we got, it was well acted and well played. Yuki and Yumimaru are very much the same. These aren't characters that really need development, as they are mostly just objects to be rescued, but we do end up learning a lot about them, even with what little there is, and they are just as likable, and you do ultimately feel driven enough to want to rescue them. Onimusha Warlords really is a story that shows how simplicity can go a long way, and truly it's a very fundamental start to what could be built upon with later additions. And it's actually a game I would say is a good study for game design on how you can create a simple but fun story with characters that don't have to be super complex to be interesting. Sometimes the mystery behind what makes characters interesting can be a draw, but also the extreme importance on what's happening to them in the now should also take precedence so that you don't feel like you have to waste time asking why. And when you can come up with a unique balance that combines all of these elements, then I think you really do have something special. But what do I know? I'm just a weird gamer. Anyway, guys, I think this video is getting pretty long as it is, so we should probably switch subjects here, as I really could just go on and on. After all, the story is really only half the battle. The gameplay is where things must also shine the brightest. Now, depending on which version of the game you are playing, there will be some subtle differences across the board. The original PS2 version of the game is obviously the most base version and doesn't have any of what I would call quality of life improvements. For example, if you are a modern gamer and you aren't efficient with traditional tank controls, well, then you might want to avoid these versions, and probably the original Xbox version as well. As the game, like all survival horror games at the time, were built with this control scheme in mind, all because of the pre-rendered backgrounds and the camera changing with every transition. I know people today love to fool themselves into believing that this control scheme was bad and purposefully made to be, but no, that's not true. At the time, and arguably still even to today, the tank controls have a place in video games, and they were and still can be very practical. Especially if you're playing a game where you, by design, have little to no control over the camera's point of view. Forward and back on the D-pad would have the character move forward and back, while left and right would have them turn in place. And it's consistent no matter what direction the camera is facing. And that's why it was practical. Other games in the past have tried to experiment with having full analog control in a game with fixed camera angles, and results have varied across the board. That being said, Onimusha Remastered for the PlayStation 4 and Nintendo Switch does add the option to play the game with a new complete analog control, as well as the D-pad for tank controls, if you want to use them. The D-pad still functions traditionally, but now the analog stick can move Samanosuke all around freely with no restrictions to his animations. Obviously, it makes his movements now look very herky-jerky, but if it means giving the player more control and or comfort, I doubt that many will complain about this, unless you're really one of those pure traditionalists that don't like change. Of course, when you are playing with free analog control in a game like this, there will be times that when the camera changes positions, which is all the time, mind you, the analog controls are going to change with it, meaning there will probably be half a dozen times when you are transitioning you might get caught going back and forth between screens trying to situate yourself since the control is changing on you. But, like with tank controls themselves, you can and will get used to them, and you'll find a comfort zone somewhere in there, and in no time you will be moving around with little to no problems at all. One thing this new free analog movement edition did do to the game as a whole, though, was make it much easier. Originally, you could and pretty much had to lock on to any and all enemies, having that one be your focus so you could attack, dodge, or strafe around them, especially with bosses. And this was mostly because enemies like to wind up for a powerful attack, so strafing around them was usually the best way to avoid them while maintaining your focus. And of course, you still can do that, but admittedly now, because we have full analog control, I'm no longer locked into a control grid of sorts, and I can freely move around all enemies with no need to ever lock onto anything. Having this much free movement actually makes it so much easier to avoid just about any attack from every enemy. I am not exaggerating here. Bosses that used to be considered threatening, that would require some semblance of strategy to defeat while locked on and strafing around them, has been completely removed simply cause I can break Samanosuke's animations and move wherever the hell I want. Is this a pro? Is this a con? I really don't know. All I can say is that it does work, but I can understand if some people that were purists could find this potentially upsetting because this new free movement kinda took out the challenge of the game to a degree. But since we're talking about combat, being a hack and slash game, swords and melee weapons are your primary means of attacking enemies. The game starts you off with your basic katana, but you'll quickly ditch that in about 10 minutes when shortly thereafter Samanosuke gets the Oni Gauntlet. You'll then come across your first major weapon upgrade, the Ryzen Electric Katana. It functions just like the regular katana. It's fast, has a good bit of damage to it, but by pressing triangle you can use the weapon's special attack with lightning strikes on a single target. Over the course of the game, and pretty much early on now that I think about it, you'll find 3 unique magical weapons. The Ryzen being one of them, the Enryu Fire Sword, and the Shippu Wind Blade Staff. The Fire Sword Enryu is a much heavier and slower weapon, but because of that it is all the more powerful. And it can also fire a long fire attack straight forward, burning anything in its path. The Shippu is probably the weakest weapon of the 3, but it does strike really fast and can summon a tornado spin, destroying everything around you. So I would say that all 3 of these weapons have their uses. None of them are purely situational, and if you wanted to, you could stick with just one of the weapons the entire adventure, and it would carry you through the whole game if you wanted to. But if for any reason you want to switch the weapons, which I imagine would be pretty regularly, you just have to pause the game and switch out the weapons. Something I admittedly found quite annoying back when I was playing it in my younger days, and thankfully, one of the quality of life improvements for the remaster, which I love, is that just by hitting a button command, you can toggle between any of the 3 weapons at any given time, so you never have to break up the action or pause the game. Thank you! I don't know why this wasn't a thing from the very beginning, and as far as I know, even later Onimusha games didn't get this feature. Why did it take them so long to figure out something so obvious? I really don't know, but thank God it's finally here. Hell, this alone makes the game that much better for me. And it was already good. But if I had to pick my own personal preference when it came to weapons, I would have to say the Enryu is pretty much my weapon of choice. The sheer raw power this thing has makes it easy to cut through most obstacles pretty quickly. And besides, most enemies aren't usually so fast that you can't telegraph their moves anyway. Speaking of which, with the shoulder buttons, you can either lock onto a specific enemy, which is very handy, especially during boss fights, allowing you to strafe around them for some easy strikes, or you can hold the block button to naturally defend yourself. A very unique attack though, which is admittedly hard to pull off, is what I like to call the Quick Strike. It's a move where if you pull it off, can kill most enemies in one blow, and if you do, you get better rewards and souls the more you do it. It's supposed to be triggered by pressing the attack button right before an enemy attacks you, but as far as I've learned, it's almost frame perfect, and rarely have I ever gotten it to work this way. if I ever have gotten it to work this way, I swear it was pretty much an accident. Another method of doing this attack, which for me is the most reliable way, is by performing a parry. By holding the block button just before an enemy attacks, this gives you a very good shot at parrying them and immediately following up with that quick strike attack. And it works, for the most part, but even then, it's still one of those quick reflex sort of things, so there is a good chance you will still miss about half the time. It's not quite frame perfect like how you have to do it by just pressing the attack before they hit you, but it is still one of those maneuvers that you will have to try to get used to and get comfortable using. But hot damn is it very satisfying when you do pull it off. It isn't one of those moves that I would say is mandatory to play this game, but it definitely is one of those tricky special powers that once you know it, and you don't want to forget it. As you've probably noticed by now, watching all this footage, you'll notice that the enemies, whenever they die, are dropping these glowing orbs, which are souls. By holding down the circle button, Samanosuke will absorb them. Some of these souls heal you, some of the souls replenish your magic, but most common, the souls can and will be used at save points to upgrade Samanosuke's weapons and items, making them change their look, but also increasing their powers. This is pretty self-explanatory, but like I said before, the quicker you can master that quick strike attack, and if you don't mind farming for a little bit in the beginning areas, while practicing for a while, you would be very surprised at how fast you can absorb a very good chunk of souls. I am not kidding, and most of my playthroughs in this game, I will just about max out everything in my inventory before I even make it into the main castle. And since I said a single weapon of preference can carry you through the whole game, you could start off not 20 minutes into this adventure already wielding the debatedly best weapon you have. But of course, that's not to say that there aren't other upgrades Samanosuke can get over the course of the game. While wandering through the terrain, in a similar style to the early Resident Evil games, there is a bit of backtracking you will be doing. But because the game is so short, there really is not a lot you'll have to worry about. I'd be genuinely surprised if anybody gets lost playing this game. The story and cutscenes make it very clear where you can and can't go, and where you will be able to go, and where you should be going. And it's during all of this that you can come across a lot of items, should you be observant enough to grab them. Most of the necessary ones will be in plain sight and next to impossible to miss. Some of the others will either be hidden nearby, or locked away in a trick treasure box you'll either have to rotate with numbers, or decode messages with books you can pick up. Of course, I'd be lying if I said I ever used any of these books to actually open up the treasure boxes, and that's, sadly because we literally have Google in our pocket, and hey, Google has all the answers.
You cheated.
Meanwhile, inside these treasure boxes, you can obtain armor upgrades for Samanosuke, giving him new looks. And I think they can be pretty snazzy. I mean, look, it's gold!
I love gold!
Cosmetic-wise, they don't look too different, but the gold trimming for the great armor is probably my favorite one. You can also find other weapons like bows and arrows, and even a rifle. Now, it's these weapons that are naturally limited on ammunition, and you can make more at the save point, but in truth, I think these weapons are without question the most situational and probably the most negligible. With the exception of that one boss fight with the Wasp, there really aren't many scenarios where I feel like I need to exchange my sword for a ranged weapon. There are some very rare occasions where an enemy or two can be out of reach and attack you from above, but it's just as easy to just move on to the next area and forget about them instead of wasting time fighting them. I mean, if you want to, you can, because sometimes there are helpful guards stationed nearby that are fighting these things, and if you manage to kill them before all the guards drop, they can sometimes give you helpful items like herbs and medicines. So if you feel less confident in your survival skills, it probably wouldn't be a bad idea to help these guys out. Now, because I mentioned you'll be traversing back and forth several times, that usually means that you are going to be finding keys and such to new areas you weren't able to reach before, and that also involves some puzzle solving. And, yeah, that's kinda true. But to be frank, I would say the, quote-unquote puzzles are pretty basic. There's nothing here on the level of Silent Hill or a Resident Evil in terms of brain busters, and the only puzzles that can potentially throw you for a loop are, well, the optional ones. However, there is one that I think is pretty infamous, and it happens early on when Samanosuke and Kaede are caught in the castle's trap rooms. And Samanosuke gets trapped in a room where the water is rising, leaving Kaede to solve a timed puzzle where you gotta move these squares around in order to get to the emblem piece in the center before the water reaches the top. Now, the puzzle really isn't that hard, and it can be solved a handful of ways, but oh man, I gotta tell you, considering that this is a game where there are no checkpoints and you have to manually save your game in order to keep your progress, this is the kind of shit that can really test how well you handle situations under pressure. And when you start to see that dial get closer to the top, oh my god, it's time to panic! Luckily, this is about the worst it gets, and the rest of the game is fairly smooth sailing. There are doors with big colored eyes on them that will prevent you from progressing, and the only way through is to upgrade a certain weapon that corresponds to them. So, by the by, whether you like it or not, you will have to do a little bit of soul grinding in order to progress. But again, this really depends on how efficient you are at killing enemies, and if you're not just running past everything just trying to get to the next area. I actually do consider this padding of a sort, but considering how short this game is otherwise, I figured they had to find some way to put some kind of manageable roadblock in the way. Sometimes you won't even have the correct weapon on you yet when you come across these things, indicating for you to come back later after you've obtained them and maybe even level them up a bit. This game is technically counted as a survival horror, but there really isn't anything that I would say in it that makes it scary. It just heavily shares elements from Resident Evil, and I would actually consider this a good entry level into the Resident Evil series if you haven't played any of them up until now. Samanosuke, if you were here for the story section, you know isn't our only playable character. There are two brief segments here where our hero's female companion Kaede becomes playable. Similar to Samanosuke, she travels to and from places collecting items and solving puzzles. However, Kaede does not have any special powers. As a ninja though, she is a little faster than Samanosuke on all fronts, and attacks with a small blade. While targeting enemies, Kaede can also elegantly maneuver around targets and even do backflips over them, getting in close for an easy kill by slashing their throats. Damn, that's awesome. It really is a shame though that we don't get to spend a longer time with Kaede because her combat can be pretty fun. However, because, again, she has no means of collecting souls or magic, her abilities would only get you so far. However, she is able to use her shinobi kit and break into rooms Samanosuke couldn't previously, so she does have her purpose. Short and sweet as it was, Kaede was a nice twist and breakup from the norm. Personally, I think it would have been cooler if we had an entire campaign dedicated to her. Oh well. Coulda, woulda, shoulda, didn't. Now, despite the length of the game, there is actually a lot to do within it. And no, I'm not just talking about beating it. There is a ton of hidden little quests and trinkets you can collect. All optional, sure, but if you like New Game Plus content, this stuff is probably worth the trip. On 2 occasions during gameplay, I ran across this weird character who hangs from a vine, and if you talk to him, he offers to take you to the Dark Realm, which is just a stage-by-stage gauntlet of enemies that goes on for about 10 to 20 rounds. It's challenging, but by this point I had been leveling up my equipment, and there is no rush to accept his offer right away if you don't want to. You can always come back later and do it when you feel more prepared. So if you are playing this fresh, don't feel like you need to rush into this. As you ascend in the gauntlet, you can obtain special treasures that you would miss out on, and the most useful one is an item called the Bishaman Ocarina. Throughout the adventure, it has no use and it will just sit in your inventory, but when you make it to the final section of the game, just beyond the final Marcellus fight, there will be a locked door off to the side. There is no indication for what this room is for, and the first time I came across it, I chose to experiment and see just what the heck this ocarina I've been carrying around all this time does. And lo and behold, I guessed right, as this flute opens the door, leading you to unquestionably the greatest weapon in the game, and all Onimusha games moving forward, should you find it. Behold, the Bishaman Sword. Now, everything is your bitch. If there was any challenge left to be had in the climax of this game, it is now gone, as the Bishaman Sword is literally the power of all 3 weapons in one, and it tears through enemies and bosses like nothing. The only exception is the final boss himself, for Tinbras. The sword still decimates the hell out of him, don't get me wrong, making this fight a non-issue, but it still takes a while to put him down. God, I love this sword. Yes, it makes the game easy and a cakewalk and reduces it to baby's first game, but Screw it, I don't care. This is a privilege that I earned after conquering the hardest challenges in the game just to obtain it. So screw anybody who gives me crap about using this weapon. I love it, I earned it, it's mine, shut up. I do not feel bad about this. Besides, legitimately, by the time you get this sword, you're at the final boss, so there's not much left to do anyway. However, there are more unlockables to talk about. Okay, so exceptionally well hidden all throughout the game like little Easter eggs are these little balls called fluorites. They aren't impossible to find on your own, and hell, I think I found almost all of them myself before I consulted a guide on where I think the last 2 that I was missing were supposed to be. If you complete the game with all 30 of them, you can unlock some bonus challenges like Oni Spirits. Fuck this challenge. I pulled it off, but it took several attempts, and I was getting dreadfully aggravated at the repeats I had to do in order to complete this son of a bitch. But once you do, you can start a new game with the Bishamon sword from the start. Also, Samanosuke is a furry. Who knew? Well, as interesting as that would be to explore, I think it's time we once again switched subjects and talked about Genma Onimusha, the original Xbox version of this game, which, as I've said before, has very unique features all its own. Alright, now this is going to be a strange experience. You guys remember how Capcom would release alternate versions of games for different consoles back in the day with bonus content and such, and then never make that version available to play anywhere else ever again? Genma Onimusha is pretty much that. On the surface, the game is fairly identical to the original. The story is the same, the cutscenes are the same, most of the world and level terrain is the same. But there are a lot of differences that lay under the surface. Some are subtle, and most are pretty gigantic. First of all, let me remind you that this is just a later released version of the original game on the Xbox with just some additional content and changes. This is not a remaster. So that means all of the quality of life improvements that I talked about, like being able to free run anywhere and switch weapons on the fly, is non-existent here. Like with the original game, you have to use the tank controls, which again for me is just fine, and you have to pause the game to switch weapons, which for me is not fine, especially after I was spoiled earlier by the remaster, goddammit. So yeah, this was kind of annoying to have to go back to. As for game differences, there is actually quite a few, so we'll go over them now. First of all, you guys remember in The Legend of Zelda when you beat the game you unlock a second quest? It was basically a new game on top of the original that, to put it simply, changes the dungeons around, makes the enemies harder, and also changes the locations of the key items. That is pretty much this entire game. Pretty much all of the enemies have been altered. Difficult enemies you would encounter in small increments have now become commonplace, and in areas where there originally weren't any. Key items to progress in the main game have all had their locations changed, and as far as enemies are concerned, this version added a brand new enemy that you'll encounter regularly. Remember how I said Onimusha technically counted as a survival horror and didn't really have anything in it that was scary? The Xbox version definitely rectifies that problem. Early on, while collecting a key item, Samanosuke triggers a new cutscene where we get to see this. Oh my god! Forget Fortinbras, forget Guildenstern, forget Marcellus. These little dolls are the scariest thing in the game. They hit hard, they strike fast, and they have a grab attack that will drain your health in seconds, dropping you dead. Listen to me now. If you do not have the Bishamon sword, do not, and I repeat, do not attempt to fuck with these things. If you see them or hear them giggling in the background, just haul ass and leave to the next area. Without the Bishamon sword, trying to fight these dolls is almost a fruitless endeavor. You will either fail and get killed in the attempt, or you will waste all of your medicinal items in the process, having very little to show for it. Yes, if you do beat the dolls, they do give out a hefty amount of souls as a reward, but in my opinion, oh, it is so not worth it. The enemies in Onimusha have always had a degree of RNG when it came to what was gonna pop up on a room you visit, and the dolls have now become part of that equation, and will randomly show up at selective points in the game. Now, because I do have the Bishaman sword, I have a fighting chance, but even still, all it takes is a few really good hits and or just a couple of grabs from these fuckers just to end your adventure. So even with the best sword in the game, you really gotta be careful with these things. Save often. Speaking of saving, enhancing the weapons in the Xbox version has also become harder, because the game combines the weapons along with their respective orbs. It now takes almost triple the amount of orbs you'd regularly need to upgrade a single weapon. Just once! By the time I got to the end of the game, I still didn't even have the Shippu maxed out because my efforts were mostly set on surviving. Now, if you do manage to be good at surviving and are a little more explorative, there are some other differences to mention. First of all, Samanosuke's alternate armor costumes are different in this version, and while I still prefer the great armor with its gold trimming in the original game, I do have to admit, I do like how these alternative versions look. Probably the neatest addition in this version is the bonus areas. If you find a mysterious key in the Dark Realm, you can use it to access this secret door that in the original was actually blocked off. So the fact that they changed an entire image for this alone is pretty cool. But when you go inside, you get access to this secret bonus Oni Tower where, just like the Demon Realm, you have to fight for what I think is about 60 straight floors of enemies working your way to the top. It takes a while, that's for sure. But if you manage to reach it, you get to fight a secret boss. Yes, he's a little challenging, but very beatable. Once you do put him down, your reward is the Ogre Armor, the best armor in the game, and very useful against the bullcrap you are facing. It's just kind of sad that by the time you get it, you are pretty much halfway through the adventure, if not towards the climax. Additionally, there is another attack Samanosuke now has where he can charge the energy of the special attacks from his special weapons. And depending on how much magic you put into the attack, it deals that much more damage. Useful, sure, but I feel like this is one of those moves that you'll sadly forget that you have, and still I even rarely used it. There is also this new green soul orb you can occasionally find when you kill enemies. What makes this interesting is enemies can actually try to absorb the orb as well, forcing you to have a little bit of a tug-of-war match in order to get it. If you manage to collect 5 of them, you can press one of the buttons below to have Samanosuke heal himself with a glowing aura. It can be useful, especially if you want to hold on to your herbs and medicines, but should an enemy manage to absorb one of them, well, the already hard enemies just got that much harder as they now glow red with a status buff. Fortunately, like the original, there's nothing stopping you from just leaving the area and coming back. It's not a bad version to play, and I would still recommend it if you still had an original Xbox and some time to kill. Just be forewarned, you are kinda walking into a meat grinder here. All in all, I would say that Genma Onimusha is actually a pretty cool reimagining of the original game, probably made for fans who experienced it, and really just this time around wanted something a little bit more fresh and probably more of a challenge. God knows they're gonna get one with this entry. I mean, after all, the original game, despite being really good, is frankly not all that hard. It's got challenging moments in it, to be sure, but moments is really all it comes down to. There's nothing in it, say, on the level of, I'd say, any Devil May Cry game, or, to be fair, even later Onimusha games. Now, as we move on, there is actually one more subject I want to talk about here, and it could potentially be a controversial one, and that would be the music. Dun dun dun, yeah, here we are. Alright, so when the game got remastered for the PlayStation 4 and the Nintendo Switch, one thing that I, and probably every fan of this game, noticed right away was that the soundtrack had been completely replaced with entirely new music. Now, I'm not going to go deep into it, as I'm not entirely sure what all the facts are, and I'm not sure if anybody truly does. But the original credited composer for Onimusha, as well as Resident Evil, Mamoru Samuraguchi, who was once a well-respected musical composer, was recently outed for committing fraud in the industry. You see, he was secretly going deaf in his 30s and wasn't able to really compose much of anything, and then eventually, supposedly, lost his hearing altogether before Onimusha was fully developed. So he secretly hired a mystery composer, now revealed as Takashi Nigaki, to compose all of the music for him on his behalf. Making matters more chaotic, there's been concerns on how much truth there is to Samuraguchi's deafness, as there have been those, including Takashi himself, stating that Mamoru wasn't deaf at all. But if you've heard some of the director's cut music of Resident Evil, I don't know. I think there's some validity to the claim that he probably was a little hard of hearing. So yeah, basically, I imagine Capcom said, alright, screw this, and didn't want to touch this situation with a 10-foot pole, and decided that when the time came to release Onimusha again, to just go ahead and strip the music and replace the entire soundtrack. And thanks, I hate it. Look, it's not terrible or anything, it does a serviceable job, but man, the original music from Takashi was such a home run for me. And it's so beautiful that it really is a crime that it's now stuck only in the original games. Don't worry, I'm going to share with you guys a couple of my favorite tracks in a moment, but just to give you an example of how well the original music worked in setting up the mood and feel with its characters, I'm going to play for you just one scene from early on in the game, and just listen for every little note and subtle difference when the tones change. And tell me that it doesn't just hit your soul when you see Yuki and Samanosuke embrace one another and you hear things like that soft whistle in the background.
Princess Yuki, Your Highness.
Samanosuke, it's really you. Oh, I knew that you would come to save me. I have missed you so much since you left the castle.
Princess Yuki, Your Highness.
Samanosuke, it's really you. Oh, I knew that you would come to save me. I have missed you so much since you left the castle.
Like I said, the new soundtrack isn't the most offensive thing here, but call me a biased or a nostalgic twat if you want, but I heavily prefer the original, whoever the hell composed it. It's beautiful work, and it doesn't deserve to be forgotten. Speaking of which, here's a few other tracks from the original that I also love to hear regularly on any of my playlists. Onimusha Warlords was and still is, in my eyes, a great game. Sure, it's not the longest game ever, nor is it the most challenging, but Onimusha Warlords sets up a great foundation, and for its first outing, it succeeded in everything it set out to do, and in the end, became a success. This game really is a shining example of how simplicity can go a long way, and showing quality over quantity. I've played hundreds of games throughout my life, and I'm always eager to try and play new games, but there really is something to be said from many of these old games that were so impactful that no matter how many times we've played them before and finished them, they keep calling back to us for us to have another go at them, like revisiting an old friend or trying to relive an old memory of a time from your youth when you were happy and had games like these be a part of that. Maybe the ones you experienced games like these with you are no longer around anymore and have passed on. But playing these games brings them back in a small way and can be a sense of comfort. And for me, that's what Onimusha is. A time machine that, even for a few hours, allows me to revisit a good time. And I'm glad that I get to share it here with you guys. And it really was a hell of a way to start back when the PlayStation 2 was brand new and this era of 3D video games was finally starting to come into its own. And the technology was beginning to deliver us into a new era where things would never be the same. This generation was a truly exciting time to be a gamer, and I was very happy to be there to experience it all as it was happening. Onimusha came from nothing and turned into a successful franchise for Capcom for years to come. Only time will tell if there's a future for more Onimusha games down the line, or maybe even a remake of this one akin to what Capcom's doing now with its Resident Evil games. But until then, if you have a PlayStation 2, an Xbox, a Nintendo Switch, or a PlayStation 4, I say go grab yourself a copy of Onimusha Warlords and send those demons back straight to hell where they belong. You know, we've been running this channel for over 12 years now, and after all these years, there are a ton of franchises that I absolutely love that I never really gave the kind of attention they deserve here. From Kingdom Hearts to Sonic the Hedgehog to The Legend of Zelda and many more. To me, these were games I loved, but also liked enjoying in isolation. And I think it's time I escaped that sort of selfish mindset and allowed myself to share my experiences, stories, and opinions, and even memories with all of you guys. If you've been with us this long, we thank you and hope we've kept you entertained. If you are new to the channel, hey, we hope you come aboard and hang with us as we continue down this journey. Who knows where it will lead? Where it will probably lead? Us making more videos, probably. Yeah, thank you guys for hanging out with me. I know this was a long video. Trust me, it wasn't my intention for it to be this long, but sometimes that's just how things end up. So, if you guys liked the video, I would love to hear your thoughts. What did you think of Onimusha? Have you ever played the game? Did this video encourage you to try out the game for yourselves? And if it did, which one are you going to try out? I would love to hear it below in the comments. Let me know what you think. I'm all ears. Meanwhile, this is the Brotherhood of Gaming. I'm William Morris. If you enjoyed the show, there's a lot of ways you could show your support. You could subscribe, you can follow, you can share the videos, you can do all of that amazing stuff. And we also have a Patreon where if you want to become a patron, it's an easy $1 a month because we honestly are just doing this for fun. And if you want to show your support, hey, there's a way to do it. We've also got our Discords, our Twitters, and all that fun stuff if you want to keep up to date with what the Brotherhood of Gaming has got coming in the future. We try to keep in touch. Meanwhile, guys, you be safe out there. I know it's tough during these trying times, but do try to keep your heads up. Try to maintain a good headspace and help out your friends and your neighbors, because only by sticking together are we going to get through all of this and make a better future. Hope you all have a wonderful night, and we will see you next time, and whatever that video might be. I might start a poll. We'll see. Anyway, everyone, have a good night. William, out.